My name is Victoria Sterling, and 6 months ago, my father replaced me as CEO of our family's pharmaceutical empire with my half sister who had never worked a single day in the industry. But when the board of directors called an emergency vote 3 weeks later, what happened next shocked everyone in that boardroom and changed the course of our company forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Sterling, and as I sit in my corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Pharmaceuticals headquarters, overlooking the bustling financial district of Chicago, I can barely comprehend how dramatically my life has transformed in the span of just 6 months. The woman I am today feels like a completely different person from the one who walked into that devastating board meeting on a gray October morning, unprepared for the betrayal that would shatter everything I believed about family, loyalty, and my own worth. Today, I am the validated CEO of a company that has achieved record-breaking performance under my leadership, but the journey to this moment began with the most crushing professional and personal rejection I had ever experienced. The memory of that day still carries the sharp edge of betrayal, though it no longer carries the weight of self-doubt that nearly destroyed my confidence in my own capabilities. Let me take you back to where this extraordinary story truly begins, because understanding the depth of that initial devastation will help you appreciate the magnitude of what became possible when I finally stopped seeking approval from people who were never capable of recognizing my true value. 6 months ago, I was 34 years old and serving as the Executive Vice President of Operations at Sterling Pharmaceuticals, the company my grandfather founded in 1967, and my father, Richard Sterling, had transformed into one of the most successful mid-size pharmaceutical companies in the Midwest. For 8 years, I had been systematically preparing to assume the CEO position that everyone, including my father, had indicated would naturally be mine when he decided to step down from active leadership. My preparation had been methodical and comprehensive. I had earned my MBA from Northwestern Kellogg's School of Management, specializing in pharmaceutical business strategy and regulatory affairs. I had worked in every major department of Sterling Pharmaceuticals, from research and development to regulatory compliance to international marketing. I had led the successful launch of 3 major drug products that generated over $200 million in combined revenue. I had built relationships with key regulatory agencies, established partnerships with major research institutions, and developed strategic alliances with international distributors that expanded our market reach into 12 new countries. Most importantly, I had spent the previous 2 years essentially functioning as the operational CEO, while my father focused on board relations and strategic planning. The executive team reported to me on daily operational matters. I led the quarterly earnings calls with analysts and investors. I represented Sterling Pharmaceuticals at industry conferences and regulatory hearings. Every major operational decision flowed through my office, and under my leadership, the company had achieved its most profitable 2-year period in its 57-year history. The pharmaceutical industry is notoriously complex, requiring deep understanding of scientific research, regulatory requirements, manufacturing protocols, international compliance standards, and sophisticated financial management. Success requires the ability to navigate relationships with researchers, regulatory agencies, healthcare providers, insurance companies, international partners, and investors simultaneously, while managing the inherent risks of an industry where a single regulatory setback can eliminate hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. I had demonstrated competence in all of these areas through concrete results that were visible to everyone in the organization and throughout the industry. Our regulatory approval timelines had improved by 38% under my operational leadership. Our manufacturing efficiency had increased by 24%, while maintaining the highest quality standards in our company's history. Our international revenue had grown by 67% through strategic partnerships I had personally developed and managed. These achievements were not abstract or theoretical. They were measurable improvements that directly contributed to the company's financial performance and market position. Industry publications had recognized Sterling Pharmaceuticals for operational excellence, and I had been personally invited to speak at major pharmaceutical conferences about innovative approaches to regulatory strategy and international market development. But what I did not understand at the time was that professional competence and demonstrated results were apparently insufficient to guarantee the recognition and opportunities I believed they would naturally provide. My assumption that excellence would speak for itself proved to be devastatingly naive. The first indication that my assumptions about my future role were incorrect came during a private dinner with my father in late September. We were discussing the company's 5-year strategic plan, and I was outlining my vision for expanding our research and development capabilities to focus on breakthrough therapies for neurological disorders, an area where I believed Sterling Pharmaceuticals could establish a significant competitive advantage. My father listened to my presentation with what I interpreted as his usual thoughtful attention, asking detailed questions about timelines, investment requirements, and potential partnerships with research institutions. The conversation felt productive and collaborative, reinforcing my confidence that we shared a similar vision for the company's future direction. But then, near the end of our dinner, my father made a comment that introduced the first note of uncertainty into my understanding of our relationship and my role in the company's future. He mentioned that he had been having conversations with my half-sister Sophia about her potential interest in taking on greater responsibilities within the family business. Sophia Sterling Morrison was my father's daughter from his second marriage, 12 years younger than me, with a background in marketing and communications rather than pharmaceutical operations. She had worked for various consumer products companies in brand management roles, achieving respectable success in developing marketing campaigns for lifestyle products and consumer electronics. However, she had no experience in pharmaceutical operations, regulatory affairs, or the complex scientific and business challenges that define success in our industry. When my father mentioned these conversations, I assumed he was referring to some kind of advisory or marketing role that might utilize her communications background, while allowing her to learn about the pharmaceutical business. The possibility that he was considering her for senior operational leadership never entered my consideration because it seemed professionally inconceivable given the requirements of pharmaceutical management and her complete lack of relevant experience. "I think Sophia could bring some fresh perspective to our strategic thinking," my father said, his tone carrying a casualness that masked the significance of what he was apparently contemplating. "She has strong analytical skills and excellent instincts for market positioning. Sometimes an outside perspective can identify opportunities that industry veterans might overlook." I responded positively to this suggestion because I genuinely believed that diverse perspectives could enhance our strategic planning process. I offered to work with Sophia on developing her understanding of pharmaceutical operations and to include her in strategic planning discussions, where her marketing background might provide valuable insights. What I failed to recognize was that my father was not seeking my input on how to utilize Sophia's capabilities within the existing organizational structure. He was informing me that he was considering fundamentally restructuring that organization in ways that would displace me from the leadership role I had been preparing to assume for nearly a decade. The devastating revelation came 3 weeks later, during what I believed would be a routine board meeting focused on quarterly performance review and strategic planning discussions. I had prepared comprehensive presentations on our operational achievements, financial performance, and strategic recommendations for the coming year. I expected the meeting to reinforce the board's confidence in the leadership transition that everyone had been anticipating. Instead, I found myself sitting in that boardroom listening to my father announce that he had decided to restructure the company's leadership team by appointing Sophia as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. He explained that this decision reflected his assessment that the company needed new energy and fresh thinking to navigate the evolving challenges of the pharmaceutical industry. The announcement was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone my father used for discussing quarterly earnings or regulatory updates. There was no acknowledgement of the years I had spent preparing for this role, no recognition of the results I had achieved under my operational leadership, and no explanation of why my demonstrated competence was apparently insufficient for the position I had been systematically preparing to assume. The board members sat in stunned silence, clearly as surprised by this announcement as I was. Several board members had specifically commented to me in previous meetings about their confidence in my capabilities, and their anticipation of my eventual leadership of the company. The decision to bypass me in favor of someone with no pharmaceutical experience appeared to contradict every conversation we had previously had about succession planning and leadership development. But what made the announcement even more devastating was the realization that this decision had apparently been made without any consultation with me, despite the fact that I had been functioning as the operational leader of the company for the previous 2 years. My father had concluded that my performance was inadequate for permanent leadership without ever discussing his concerns with me, or providing opportunities for me to address whatever shortcomings he had identified. The meeting continued with my father outlining his vision for how Sophia's leadership would position Sterling Pharmaceuticals for future growth and innovation. He spoke about the value of bringing marketing expertise to pharmaceutical leadership and the importance of challenging traditional approaches to business development and strategic planning. I sat through this presentation feeling as though I was observing someone else's nightmare, rather than experiencing my own reality. The cognitive dissonance between my understanding of my role and value within the company and the reality being presented in that boardroom was so profound that I struggled to process what was actually happening. When the meeting concluded, I found myself standing in the hallway outside the boardroom, holding the briefcase containing the strategic presentations I had prepared but never had the opportunity to deliver. Several board members approached me with expressions of confusion and concern, clearly struggling to understand the rationale behind the leadership decision they had just witnessed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Victoria, I have to say this comes as quite a surprise," said Dr. Margaret Chen, the longest-serving board member and former chief scientific officer of a major pharmaceutical company. "Your operational leadership has been exceptional, and I thought the succession plan was well established. Do you understand the reasoning behind this change?" I realized that I had no meaningful response to her question because I did not understand the reasoning any better than she did. The decision appeared to contradict every metric of performance and every previous conversation about leadership development and succession planning. That evening, I drove home to my apartment in Lincoln Park, feeling completely disconnected from my own life and career. The future I had been systematically building toward for nearly a decade had been eliminated without explanation or consultation. The professional identity I had developed through years of education, experience, and demonstrated achievement had been declared insufficient by the one person whose approval I had believed was most important. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of this experience was the realization that my father had apparently concluded that someone with no pharmaceutical experience was better qualified to lead Sterling Pharmaceuticals than I was, despite my years of preparation and proven track record of operational success. The questions that consumed my thoughts during those dark hours were not primarily about my career prospects or financial security. They were about my fundamental understanding of my own capabilities and worth. If 8 years of dedicated effort and demonstrable results were insufficient to earn the recognition and opportunities I had believed they would provide, what did that say about my judgment, my abilities, and my prospects for future success? Have you ever experienced the devastating realization that your efforts and achievements were apparently meaningless to the people whose approval you most desperately sought? Have you felt the crushing weight of discovering that your understanding of your own value was fundamentally disconnected from how others perceived your worth? If so, then you understand the emotional landscape I was navigating during those initial weeks after my father's announcement. The gap between my internal confidence in my capabilities and the external message that those capabilities were insufficient created a crisis of professional and personal identity that threatened to undermine everything I believed about myself and my potential. What I discovered during those dark weeks was that the most profound transformations often begin with the most devastating rejections. The shock of being dismissed despite demonstrated competence forced me to confront fundamental questions about seeking validation through traditional channels versus creating independent platforms for demonstrating value. The story I am about to share chronicles how I transformed from someone seeking family approval into someone whose professional success became independent of family recognition. But more importantly, it demonstrates how anyone can leverage devastating rejection as motivation for achieving extraordinary results that make external validation irrelevant. The journey that followed would test every assumption I had about business, leadership, and my own potential, but it would ultimately prove that the most powerful vindication comes not from convincing others of your worth, but from demonstrating results so compelling that recognition becomes inevitable. If you have ever been underestimated by people who should have known better, dismissed despite proven capabilities, or excluded from opportunities you had earned through merit, then this story is for you. Because what I learned is that being undervalued by others often reveals more about their limitations than about your actual potential. The transformation that followed my father's devastating decision would ultimately validate every assumption I had made about my own capabilities, while proving that his assessment of my value was the most catastrophic business judgment in Sterling Pharmaceuticals history. The weeks following my father's devastating announcement became the most valuable educational period of my professional career, though I did not recognize it as such at the time. While everyone around me assumed I was simply processing disappointment and adjusting to my new circumstances, I was actually conducting an intensive study of organizational dynamics, board relationships, and strategic decision-making from a perspective that would have been impossible to achieve from the CEO position I had originally sought. My new role as Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, a position my father created to soften the blow of my demotion, provided me with unique access to information and insights that would prove invaluable in the months ahead. While Sophia struggled to understand the complexities of pharmaceutical operations from her new executive suite, I was systematically analyzing the company's strategic vulnerabilities and developing solutions that would ultimately demonstrate the catastrophic nature of my father's leadership decision. The irony was profound. By removing me from operational leadership, my father had inadvertently provided me with the analytical distance and strategic perspective necessary to identify fundamental problems that were invisible to those immersed in daily management responsibilities. My new position required me to evaluate Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive position, assess emerging market opportunities, and analyze the effectiveness of our current strategic initiatives across all business units. This comprehensive analytical responsibility gave me access to performance data, market intelligence, and strategic assessments from every department within the company. For the first time in my career, I could observe our entire operation from a holistic perspective rather than focusing on specific operational challenges within individual departments. What I discovered during this period of intensive analysis was both alarming and enlightening. Sterling Pharmaceuticals was facing several critical strategic challenges that threatened our long-term viability. But these challenges were not immediately visible to executives focused on short-term operational performance. The company's apparent success was masking underlying vulnerabilities that would require sophisticated strategic intervention to address effectively. The first major vulnerability I identified was our dangerous over-reliance on 3 legacy drug products that generated 67% of our total revenue. These medications had been market leaders for over a decade, but patent protections were scheduled to expire within the next 18 months. Generic competition would inevitably reduce revenue from these products by 70 to 80%, creating a massive financial gap that our current product development pipeline was inadequate to fill. This patent cliff represented an existential threat to Sterling Pharmaceuticals' financial stability. Yet our strategic planning discussions had consistently underestimated both the magnitude of the revenue impact and the timeline required to develop replacement products. The executive team, now led by Sophia, was operating under assumptions about product development timelines and market penetration rates that were optimistic to the point of being unrealistic. The second critical vulnerability was our inadequate investment in research and development relative to industry standards and competitive requirements. Sterling Pharmaceuticals was allocating only 14% of revenue to research and development, significantly below the industry average of 22% for companies of our size and market position. This underinvestment had created a weak product pipeline that would be insufficient to sustain growth once our legacy products faced generic competition. More concerning was the strategic focus of our limited research and development efforts. The company was pursuing incremental improvements to existing drug categories rather than investigating breakthrough therapies that could establish new market categories or address unmet medical needs. This conservative approach minimized short-term risk but virtually guaranteed long-term irrelevance in an industry where innovation was the primary driver of sustainable competitive advantage. The third major vulnerability was our limited international presence in rapidly growing pharmaceutical markets. Sterling Pharmaceuticals generated only 18% of revenue from international operations, despite the fact that emerging markets represented the fastest-growing segment of the global pharmaceutical industry. Our competitors were establishing manufacturing facilities, research partnerships, and distribution networks in markets where we had minimal presence. This geographic concentration created both opportunity costs and strategic risks. We were missing growth opportunities in markets where demand for pharmaceutical products was expanding rapidly, and we were vulnerable to regulatory or economic disruptions in our primary markets that could significantly impact our financial performance. As I documented these strategic vulnerabilities through detailed analysis and comprehensive reporting, I began to develop what I privately called the Strategic Transformation Framework, a systematic approach to addressing these challenges through coordinated initiatives that would reposition Sterling Pharmaceuticals for long-term success in an evolving industry landscape. The framework addressed each vulnerability through specific strategic initiatives that were designed to work synergistically rather than competing for resources or management attention. Instead of treating patent cliff preparation, research and development optimization, and international expansion as separate challenges requiring separate solutions, I designed an integrated approach that would address all three vulnerabilities simultaneously while creating operational efficiencies and strategic advantages. For patent cliff mitigation, I proposed accelerating development of our most promising pipeline products through strategic partnerships with specialized research organizations that could provide expertise and resources we lacked internally. These partnerships would reduce development timelines while sharing both costs and risks with organizations that had complementary capabilities. For research and development optimization, I recommended refocusing our limited resources on breakthrough therapies for neurological disorders, an area where Sterling Pharmaceuticals could leverage our existing regulatory relationships and manufacturing capabilities, while pursuing market opportunities with minimal direct competition from major pharmaceutical companies. For international expansion, I proposed establishing joint ventures with regional pharmaceutical companies in key emerging markets, allowing us to access local market knowledge and distribution networks while sharing the costs and risks of international expansion. Most importantly, I designed these initiatives to reinforce each other rather than competing for resources. The international joint ventures would provide funding for accelerated research and development efforts, while our breakthrough therapy focus would differentiate our products in international markets and reduce dependence on legacy products facing patent expiration. The Strategic Transformation Framework represented a comprehensive approach to repositioning Sterling Pharmaceuticals for sustainable long-term growth, while addressing immediate threats to our market position and financial stability. The framework was based on rigorous analysis of industry trends, competitive dynamics, and internal capabilities, but it also reflected insights that could only have been developed through the comprehensive analytical perspective my new role provided. What made this period particularly valuable was the opportunity to observe how strategic decisions were being made under Sophia's leadership compared to how they had been made when I was responsible for operational management. The contrast was illuminating and deeply concerning. Sophia's approach to strategic decision-making was primarily intuitive rather than analytical. She made decisions based on general business principles she had learned in consumer products marketing, rather than pharmaceutical industry expertise or systematic analysis of market data and competitive intelligence. Her strategic initiatives were focused on short-term market positioning and brand development, rather than the long-term competitive advantages that sustainable success in pharmaceuticals required. More problematically, Sophia's lack of pharmaceutical industry experience made her dependent on advice from consultants and external advisors who had limited understanding of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' specific capabilities and market position. These external advisors were recommending generic strategies that might be appropriate for other companies, but were poorly suited to our unique circumstances and competitive environment. The strategic direction emerging under Sophia's leadership was not necessarily wrong, but it was inadequate for addressing the fundamental challenges threatening Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term viability. The company was pursuing incremental improvements to existing approaches rather than the transformational changes that our strategic analysis indicated were necessary for sustainable success. During this period, I also had opportunities to observe board dynamics and member perspectives that would prove crucial for future strategic discussions. My role in strategic development required me to present analytical findings and recommendations to board committees, giving me direct access to board member thinking and decision-making processes. What I discovered was that several board members had serious concerns about the leadership transition and Sophia's qualifications for managing a pharmaceutical company, but they had not voiced these concerns directly because of their respect for my father and their assumption that he had access to information they lacked about Sophia's capabilities and preparation for the role. Dr. Margaret Chen, the former pharmaceutical executive who served as chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, was particularly concerned about the company's research and development strategy and competitive positioning. During private conversations following committee meetings, she expressed frustration with the lack of pharmaceutical industry expertise in current strategic discussions and the absence of systematic analysis supporting major strategic decisions. Dr. Chen had spent 30 years in pharmaceutical operations and understood the complexities and risks that Sterling Pharmaceuticals was facing better than any other board member. Her concerns about current strategic direction aligned closely with the vulnerabilities I had identified through my comprehensive analysis, but she lacked the detailed internal knowledge necessary to develop specific recommendations for addressing these challenges. James Morrison, the board member with expertise in international business development, was similarly concerned about Sterling Pharmaceuticals' limited international presence and the strategic risks associated with geographic concentration in mature pharmaceutical markets. He had been advocating for international expansion initiatives for several years, but had been frustrated by the lack of systematic planning and resource allocation for international growth strategies. These conversations revealed that board members possessed valuable expertise and strategic insights that were not being effectively utilized in current strategic planning processes. The board included individuals with deep knowledge of pharmaceutical operations, international business development, financial management, and regulatory affairs, but their expertise was not being systematically integrated into strategic decision-making under current leadership. The disconnect between board member expertise and current strategic direction represented both a significant waste of valuable resources and a tremendous opportunity for someone who could effectively bridge that gap through systematic analysis and strategic recommendations that addressed the concerns these experienced professionals had identified. As my understanding of these organizational dynamics deepened, I began to recognize that my removal from operational leadership had inadvertently positioned me to address strategic challenges that were beyond the scope of day-to-day management responsibilities. The comprehensive analytical perspective required for strategic development, combined with my operational knowledge and industry expertise, created a unique capability for developing solutions that operational leaders could not envision from within their departmental responsibilities. This realization fundamentally changed my perspective on the leadership transition and my role within Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Instead of viewing my demotion as professional failure or family rejection, I began to see it as an opportunity to demonstrate strategic capabilities that would have been difficult to develop or display while managing operational responsibilities. The strategic transformation framework I was developing represented innovation that could fundamentally improve Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive position and long-term viability, but this innovation required the analytical distance and comprehensive perspective that my new role provided. The framework addressed challenges that were invisible to operational leaders and board members who lacked systematic access to comprehensive strategic analysis. More importantly, I realized that my industry expertise, operational knowledge, and systematic analytical approach created a combination of capabilities that was unique within Sterling Pharmaceuticals and possibly within the broader pharmaceutical industry. The ability to identify strategic vulnerabilities, develop integrated solutions, and understand implementation requirements through operational experience was exactly the kind of leadership capability that pharmaceutical companies needed to navigate increasingly complex competitive environments. This recognition transformed my understanding of the leadership transition from personal rejection to strategic opportunity. My father's decision to replace me with Sophia had inadvertently created the conditions necessary for me to develop and demonstrate strategic capabilities that would ultimately prove far more valuable than the operational leadership role I had originally sought. The invisible education I was receiving through comprehensive strategic analysis, board relationship development, and organizational dynamics observation was preparing me for a level of leadership contribution that would have been impossible to achieve through traditional operational advancement. The setback was becoming the foundation for a breakthrough that would validate every assumption I had made about my potential, while proving that my father's assessment of my capabilities was the most significant strategic error in Sterling Pharmaceuticals' history. The question was no longer whether I could demonstrate my value to Sterling Pharmaceuticals, but whether the company would recognize that value before competitive pressures and strategic vulnerabilities created consequences that systematic analysis and strategic innovation could no longer address effectively. The pivotal moment that crystallized my determination to prove my strategic value independent of family approval arrived on a frigid December morning during what was scheduled to be a routine quarterly board presentation. The encounter that followed would fundamentally shift my perspective from seeking validation within existing organizational structures to creating undeniable evidence of my capabilities through systematic strategic innovation. 3 months had passed since my father's announcement of the leadership transition, and Sterling Pharmaceuticals was beginning to show signs of the strategic drift I had identified through my comprehensive analysis. Quarterly revenue had declined by 8% compared to the previous year, primarily due to earlier-than-expected competitive pressure on our legacy products. Research and development timelines were extending beyond projected schedules, indicating that our product pipeline would be insufficient to offset declining revenue from patent expirations. More concerning was the growing disconnect between board expectations and operational reality under Sophia's leadership. Board members were expressing increasing frustration with strategic presentations that lacked the analytical depth and industry expertise they expected from pharmaceutical company leadership. The gap between Sophia's consumer products background and the sophisticated strategic thinking required for pharmaceutical management was becoming impossible to ignore. The December board meeting was scheduled to address these performance concerns through a comprehensive review of our strategic direction and operational priorities. As Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, I had been asked to present my analysis of competitive challenges and strategic recommendations for addressing declining performance. I had prepared extensively for this presentation, viewing it as an opportunity to demonstrate the strategic capabilities I had been developing through my comprehensive analytical work. The strategic transformation framework I had created addressed every major challenge Sterling Pharmaceuticals was facing, with specific implementation timelines, resource requirements, and performance metrics that would enable systematic evaluation of progress towards strategic objectives. The presentation represented months of intensive research, analysis, and strategic planning. I had documented competitive threats, identified market opportunities, developed implementation strategies, and created financial projections that demonstrated how integrated strategic initiatives could reposition Sterling Pharmaceuticals for sustainable long-term growth while addressing immediate threats to our market position. When I began my presentation that morning, the board members responded with the level of engagement and analytical discussion I had hoped to generate. Dr. Margaret Chen asked detailed questions about research and development partnerships and regulatory approval strategies. James Morrison expressed enthusiasm about international expansion opportunities and strategic alliance structures. Other board members contributed insights about competitive dynamics and market positioning that reflected their deep understanding of industry challenges. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, with board members exploring implications of various strategic initiatives and asking sophisticated questions about implementation priorities and resource allocation decisions. The level of strategic dialogue was exactly what I had envisioned when developing the strategic transformation framework, and the board's response indicated genuine appreciation for the analytical rigor and industry expertise that informed my recommendations. But then Sophia requested an opportunity to respond to my presentation, and what followed became the moment of clarity that changed my entire approach to demonstrating my value within Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Sophia's response revealed the fundamental limitations that were constraining Sterling Pharmaceuticals under her leadership. Instead of engaging with the strategic analysis I had presented, she dismissed my recommendations as overly complex and inconsistent with modern pharmaceutical industry trends. She argued that Sterling Pharmaceuticals needed to focus on simplified strategic approaches and, quote, customer-centric marketing initiatives, rather than the, quote, traditional pharmaceutical industry thinking that my recommendations represented. Her critique demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of pharmaceutical industry dynamics and competitive requirements. The challenges Sterling Pharmaceuticals was facing required sophisticated strategic responses based on deep industry knowledge and systematic analysis of competitive conditions. Simplified approaches and marketing initiatives, while potentially valuable in consumer products industries, were inadequate for addressing the complex regulatory, scientific, and competitive challenges that define success in pharmaceutical operations. More problematically, Sophia's response suggested that she viewed my industry expertise and analytical capabilities as limitations rather than strategic advantages. From her perspective, my systematic approach to strategic planning represented outdated thinking that needed to be replaced with more innovative approaches borrowed from other industries. The disconnect was profound and revealing. Sophia was essentially arguing that pharmaceutical companies should abandon the analytical rigor and industry expertise that successful pharmaceutical management required in favor of general business approaches that had proven effective in less complex industries. Dr. Chen's response to this exchange was immediate and pointed. She observed that pharmaceutical companies faced unique challenges that required specialized knowledge and systematic analytical approaches, and that strategic recommendations should be evaluated based on their ability to address industry-specific, competitive requirements rather than their conformity to general business principles. James Morrison added that Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive challenges were too significant and too urgent to be addressed through simplified approaches that ignored industry complexities and competitive realities. He emphasized that the board needed strategic recommendations based on rigorous analysis and deep industry knowledge, rather than generic business strategies adapted from other sectors. The tension in the boardroom was unmistakable. Board members with pharmaceutical and strategic planning expertise were expressing frustration with leadership approaches that seemed to dismiss the analytical rigor and industry knowledge they considered essential for effective pharmaceutical management. Their concerns aligned precisely with the strategic analysis I had presented, but their expertise was being marginalized by leadership that viewed industry knowledge as a constraint rather than a competitive advantage. Following the formal board meeting, Dr. Chen approached me privately for a conversation that would prove to be the catalyst for my transformation from seeking validation to creating proof of my strategic capabilities. "Victoria," she said, her tone carrying both concern and determination, "I need to speak frankly about what I observed in that boardroom today. Your strategic analysis was exactly the kind of sophisticated thinking Sterling Pharmaceuticals needs to address the challenges we are facing. The level of industry knowledge and analytical rigor you demonstrated is precisely what this board expects from pharmaceutical company leadership." She paused, studying my expression before continuing with observations that crystallized the choice I was facing between seeking approval within existing structures and creating independent platforms for demonstrating value. "However, I am deeply concerned that your expertise and strategic capabilities are not being effectively utilized under current leadership arrangements. The disconnect between the strategic thinking you presented and the leadership philosophy being implemented suggests fundamental incompatibility that may prevent Sterling Pharmaceuticals from addressing the competitive challenges you have identified." Dr. Chen's assessment was both validating and sobering. She was confirming that my strategic analysis and industry expertise represented exactly the kind of leadership capabilities Sterling Pharmaceuticals needed. But she was also acknowledging that current organizational dynamics were preventing effective utilization of those capabilities. "The question," she continued, "is whether you are prepared to demonstrate your strategic value through independent initiatives that bypass current leadership constraints, or whether you will continue hoping that your expertise will eventually be recognized through traditional organizational channels." This question forced me to confront the fundamental choice that had been emerging through months of analytical work and organizational observation. I could continue developing strategic recommendations and hoping they would be implemented by leadership that had already demonstrated lack of appreciation for systematic analysis and industry expertise. Or I could begin implementing strategic initiatives independently to create undeniable evidence of their effectiveness. The conversation with Dr. Chen revealed that continuing to seek validation through traditional channels was not only unlikely to succeed, but was actually preventing me from demonstrating the strategic capabilities that could address Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most urgent competitive challenges. The organizational structure that positioned Sophia as ultimate decision-maker created systematic barriers to implementing the strategic innovations that rigorous analysis indicated were necessary for sustainable success. More importantly, Dr. Chen's observations suggested that board members with relevant expertise were prepared to support strategic initiatives that demonstrated systematic thinking and industry knowledge, regardless of whether those initiatives emerged through traditional leadership channels. The board's responsibility was to ensure Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term viability, and they were increasingly concerned that current leadership approaches were inadequate for addressing competitive threats and market opportunities. That evening, I returned to my office and spent several hours reflecting on the implications of the day's discussions and Dr. Chen's direct challenge to my approach to demonstrating strategic value within Sterling Pharmaceuticals. The choice she had presented was clear and consequential. Continue seeking approval for strategic initiatives through leadership that had already dismissed their value, or begin implementing those initiatives independently to create evidence of their effectiveness that would make approval irrelevant. The moment of clarity arrived when I realized that seeking permission to implement strategic innovations was fundamentally incompatible with demonstrating the leadership capabilities that Sterling Pharmaceuticals actually needed. True strategic leadership required the ability to identify opportunities and create value independent of existing organizational constraints, not the ability to convince others to approve predetermined strategies. The strategic transformation framework I had developed represented genuine innovation that could address Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most urgent competitive challenges. But this innovation required implementation to demonstrate its value, rather than presentation to seek approval for implementation. The framework's effectiveness could only be proven through systematic execution and measurable results, not through theoretical analysis and strategic discussion. This realization transformed my understanding of my role and responsibilities within Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Instead of viewing myself as someone who developed strategic recommendations for others to evaluate and implement, I began to see myself as someone who could create strategic value through direct action and measurable results. The shift in perspective was profound and liberating. Instead of seeking validation through traditional channels that had already proven inadequate for recognizing strategic innovation, I could begin demonstrating strategic capabilities through independent initiatives that created undeniable evidence of their effectiveness. The question was no longer whether my strategic analysis was correct or whether my recommendations would be approved by current leadership. The question was how to begin implementing strategic initiatives that would generate measurable results while building toward comprehensive demonstration of the strategic transformation framework's effectiveness. The opportunity to answer this question emerged through my ongoing analysis of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive position and strategic vulnerabilities. The research partnerships I had recommended for accelerating product development could be initiated through my strategic development role without requiring comprehensive organizational approval. The international market assessments needed for expansion planning could be conducted through existing analytical responsibilities while building toward strategic alliance opportunities. Most importantly, the systematic documentation of competitive threats and strategic opportunities that my role required could be expanded to include specific implementation strategies and performance metrics that would enable independent evaluation of strategic initiative effectiveness. The moment of clarity had revealed that waiting for organizational approval was not only unnecessary but counterproductive for demonstrating strategic capabilities that could address Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most urgent challenges. The systematic analytical work I had been conducting provided the foundation for independent strategic initiatives that could generate measurable results while building toward comprehensive validation of innovative approaches to pharmaceutical industry challenges. The choice Dr. Chen had presented was not really about whether to continue seeking approval versus creating independent proof of strategic value. The choice was about whether to accept organizational limitations as permanent constraints, or to demonstrate that strategic innovation could transcend those limitations through systematic execution and measurable results. The decision to pursue independent strategic implementation represented a fundamental shift from seeking validation to creating undeniable evidence of strategic capabilities through direct action and systematic results. This approach aligned with the leadership philosophy that had guided my operational success at Sterling Pharmaceuticals, demonstrating value through performance, rather than seeking recognition through credentials or organizational position. The transformation from seeking permission to creating proof would ultimately determine whether Sterling Pharmaceuticals could address the competitive challenges threatening its long-term viability, and whether my strategic capabilities would be recognized before those challenges created consequences that even the most sophisticated strategic intervention could not address effectively. The moment of clarity had crystallized the choice between continuing to hope for organizational recognition and beginning to create strategic results that would make such recognition inevitable. The path forward required abandoning the illusion that validation through traditional channels was necessary for demonstrating strategic value, and embracing the reality that genuine leadership creates its own platform for recognition through systematic achievement and measurable contribution. The weeks following my moment of clarity with Dr. Chen marked the beginning of what I privately termed my underground laboratory phase. While Sterling Pharmaceuticals continued its strategic drift under Sophia's leadership, I began systematically implementing elements of my strategic transformation framework through independent initiatives that operated within the scope of my strategic development role, but extended far beyond traditional analytical responsibilities. My approach was deliberately methodical and carefully structured to avoid organizational conflict, while generating measurable results that would validate the strategic innovations I had developed. The key was identifying implementation opportunities that aligned with my existing responsibilities, while creating proof-of-concept demonstrations that could be scaled to comprehensive strategic initiatives once their effectiveness was established. The first initiative I launched focused on accelerating development timelines for our most promising pipeline products through strategic research partnerships. Sterling Pharmaceuticals had been pursuing traditional internal development approaches that were consuming excessive time and resources, while failing to leverage external expertise that could significantly enhance our capabilities and reduce our development risks. Through my strategic development role, I had legitimate authority to investigate partnership opportunities and assess external research capabilities that might complement our internal operations. I used this authority to initiate confidential discussions with 3 specialized biotechnology firms that possessed advanced research capabilities in neurological therapeutics, the focus area I had identified as our greatest opportunity for breakthrough innovation. These biotechnology firms represented exactly the kind of strategic partners that Sterling Pharmaceuticals needed to accelerate our product development while accessing specialized expertise that we lacked internally. Each firm had developed proprietary research methodologies and maintained relationships with leading research institutions that could dramatically enhance our development capabilities, while sharing both costs and risks associated with breakthrough therapy development. The partnership discussions revealed that these firms were actively seeking collaboration opportunities with established pharmaceutical companies that could provide regulatory expertise, manufacturing capabilities, and market access for innovative therapeutics they were developing. Sterling Pharmaceuticals possessed exactly the complementary capabilities these firms needed, creating natural alignment for mutually beneficial strategic partnerships. More importantly, initial assessments indicated that strategic partnerships with these firms could reduce development timelines for our priority pipeline products by 18 to 24 months, while improving success probabilities through access to specialized research methodologies and advanced technological capabilities that our internal teams lacked. I documented these findings through comprehensive partnership assessments that demonstrated specific opportunities for strategic collaboration, including detailed financial projections, risk analyses, and implementation timelines. The assessments provided concrete evidence that strategic partnerships could address our most urgent product development challenges while creating competitive advantages that would be difficult for competitors to replicate. However, instead of presenting these assessments through traditional organizational channels where they would likely be dismissed or delayed by current leadership, I began implementing pilot partnership initiatives that would generate measurable results demonstrating the effectiveness of the strategic approach I had developed. The first pilot partnership involved collaborating with Neurogenesis Research Solutions, a biotechnology firm specializing in neurodegenerative disease therapeutics. Through my strategic development authority, I negotiated a limited research collaboration focused on one of our early-stage pipeline products that had shown promising initial results but faced development challenges that our internal teams were struggling to address effectively. The collaboration agreement provided Neurogenesis Research Solutions with access to our existing research data and regulatory documentation, while giving Sterling Pharmaceuticals access to their specialized research methodologies and advanced technological capabilities. The partnership was structured to generate measurable results within 90 days, while creating framework for expanded collaboration if initial results validated the strategic approach. The implementation process required careful coordination between Sterling Pharmaceuticals' internal research teams and Neurogenesis Research Solutions' specialized capabilities, but the collaboration generated immediate benefits that exceeded our most optimistic projections. Within 60 days, the partnership had identified innovative approaches to overcoming development obstacles that our internal teams had been unable to resolve through 6 months of intensive effort. More significantly, the collaboration demonstrated that strategic partnerships could enhance our research capabilities while reducing development costs and timelines through shared expertise and risk distribution. The pilot partnership generated research breakthroughs that would have been impossible to achieve through traditional internal development approaches within comparable timeframes. Simultaneously, I launched a second underground initiative focused on international market assessment and strategic alliance development. Sterling Pharmaceuticals' limited international presence represented both a significant competitive disadvantage and an enormous growth opportunity. But current leadership had consistently postponed international expansion initiatives due to concerns about complexity and resource requirements. Through my strategic development role, I had authority to conduct market assessments and competitive analyses that could inform future strategic planning decisions. I used this authority to initiate comprehensive analysis of pharmaceutical market opportunities in emerging economies, where demand growth significantly exceeded market development by major pharmaceutical companies. The market assessment revealed that 3 specific regions offered exceptional opportunities for Sterling Pharmaceuticals to establish strategic partnerships with regional pharmaceutical companies that possessed local market knowledge and distribution capabilities, while lacking access to advanced therapeutics and regulatory expertise that we could provide through strategic alliances. These regional markets represented rapidly growing pharmaceutical sectors where established international companies had minimal presence, creating opportunities for strategic partners to achieve market leadership positions through coordinated development and marketing initiatives. The assessment indicated that strategic alliances in these markets could generate revenue growth of 40 to 60% annually while requiring minimal capital investment through risk-sharing partnership structures. More importantly, the regional pharmaceutical companies I identified as potential strategic partners possessed exactly the complementary capabilities Sterling Pharmaceuticals needed for effective international expansion. These companies understood local regulatory requirements, maintained established distribution networks, and possessed relationships with healthcare providers and regulatory agencies that would be essential for successful market entry. I began confidential discussions with leadership teams from 2 regional pharmaceutical companies that represented ideal strategic alliance opportunities. Meridian Pharma Latin America possessed strong market positions in Brazil and Mexico with established distribution networks and regulatory expertise that could facilitate Sterling Pharmaceuticals' entry into rapidly growing Latin American markets. Similarly, Asia-Pacific Therapeutics had developed market leadership positions in Southeast Asian markets, while seeking access to advanced therapeutics and regulatory expertise that we could provide through strategic partnership. These discussions revealed genuine enthusiasm for strategic alliances that would combine Sterling Pharmaceuticals' product development capabilities and regulatory expertise with regional partners' market knowledge and distribution capabilities. Initial assessments indicated that strategic alliances could generate significant revenue growth for all parties while sharing development costs and market risks through coordinated strategic initiatives. The third component of my underground laboratory focused on systematic optimization of our research and development investment strategies. Sterling Pharmaceuticals was allocating research and development resources based on historical patterns rather than strategic analysis of market opportunities and competitive dynamics, resulting in suboptimal returns on our limited research and development investments. Through detailed analysis of our research and development portfolio, I identified opportunities to reallocate resources toward higher impact initiatives that could generate superior returns while reducing overall development risks. The analysis revealed that Sterling Pharmaceuticals could achieve significantly better research and development outcomes by concentrating resources on fewer, higher potential projects rather than maintaining the current approach of pursuing multiple incremental development initiatives simultaneously. The optimization strategy I developed focused research and development investments on breakthrough therapies for neurological disorders, where Sterling Pharmaceuticals could leverage existing regulatory relationships and manufacturing capabilities while pursuing market opportunities with minimal direct competition from major pharmaceutical companies. This strategic focus would maximize return on research and development investment while creating sustainable competitive advantages that would be difficult for competitors to replicate. Implementation of the optimization strategy required coordinating with internal research teams to reallocate resources and adjust development priorities, but the changes could be implemented gradually through normal strategic planning processes, without requiring comprehensive organizational approval or major disruption to ongoing research initiatives. Within 3 months of implementing the research and development optimization strategy, Sterling Pharmaceuticals achieved measurable improvements in development efficiency and project success rates. Research teams reported improved focus and resource availability for priority projects, while development timelines for critical initiatives showed significant acceleration compared to historical performance. The combination of strategic partnership development, international market assessment, and research and development optimization created a comprehensive underground laboratory that was systematically testing and validating core components of my strategic transformation framework. Each initiative generated measurable results that demonstrated the effectiveness of integrated strategic approaches while building toward comprehensive implementation of the complete framework. More importantly, the underground laboratory was creating concrete evidence that systematic strategic innovation could address Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most urgent competitive challenges while generating superior performance compared to traditional approaches being pursued under current leadership. The measurable results from pilot initiatives provided undeniable proof that strategic transformation was not only possible but essential for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term viability. The underground laboratory approach had several strategic advantages that would prove crucial for comprehensive implementation of the strategic transformation framework. First, pilot initiatives generated measurable results that could be independently verified and evaluated, creating objective evidence of strategic effectiveness that was independent of organizational politics or leadership preferences. Second, the initiatives operated within existing organizational structures and responsibilities, demonstrating that strategic innovation could be implemented without requiring major organizational disruption or comprehensive leadership approval. This approach minimized resistance while building momentum toward larger strategic transformations. Third, the systematic nature of the underground laboratory created replicable methodologies that could be scaled to comprehensive strategic initiatives once their effectiveness was established through pilot implementations. The framework for strategic partnership development, international market assessment, and research and development optimization could be expanded to address larger opportunities and more complex challenges. Most significantly, the underground laboratory was demonstrating that Sterling Pharmaceuticals possessed internal capabilities for addressing its competitive challenges through systematic strategic innovation, contradicting the assumptions underlying current leadership approaches that emphasized external consultation and simplified strategic solutions. The results emerging from the underground laboratory were creating a foundation of evidence that would ultimately enable comprehensive validation of my strategic capabilities, while providing Sterling Pharmaceuticals with practical solutions to the competitive threats that were undermining its market position and financial performance. By the end of this underground laboratory phase, I had successfully demonstrated that strategic partnerships could accelerate product development while reducing costs and risks, that international expansion opportunities could generate significant revenue growth through strategic alliances, and that research and development optimization could improve efficiency while enhancing innovation outcomes. These results represented concrete proof that the strategic transformation framework could deliver the performance improvements Sterling Pharmaceuticals needed to address its competitive challenges and achieve sustainable long-term growth. The underground laboratory had transformed theoretical strategic analysis into measurable business results that validated every assumption underlying my comprehensive approach to pharmaceutical industry strategic planning. The foundation of evidence I had created through systematic implementation of strategic innovations would soon provide the platform for demonstrating that Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most urgent competitive challenges could be addressed through sophisticated strategic leadership, rather than the simplified approaches being pursued under current organizational arrangements. The underground laboratory had proven that genuine strategic transformation was possible through systematic implementation of analytically rigorous and industry-specific strategic innovations. The breakthrough that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of Sterling Pharmaceuticals emerged on a crisp March morning when I received confirmation that our strategic partnership with Neurogenesis Research Solutions had achieved a regulatory milestone that industry experts had predicted would take at least 18 additional months to accomplish through traditional development approaches. The success represented far more than an accelerated timeline for a single pipeline product. It demonstrated conclusively that the strategic innovation principles underlying my strategic transformation framework could deliver extraordinary results that conventional pharmaceutical development approaches were incapable of achieving within comparable timeframes or resource constraints. The regulatory milestone involved securing fast-track designation from the Food and Drug Administration for our neurological therapeutic targeting early-stage Alzheimer's disease, a designation that would expedite clinical trials and regulatory review processes while providing enhanced guidance from regulatory authorities throughout the development process. This designation was typically reserved for therapies that addressed significant unmet medical needs through innovative approaches that demonstrated substantial improvement over existing treatment options. What made this achievement remarkable was not simply the fast-track designation itself, but the timeline and circumstances through which it was obtained. Traditional pharmaceutical development approaches for neurological therapeutics typically required extensive preliminary research, multiple regulatory consultations, and comprehensive documentation processes that consumed 24 to 36 months before fast-track designation could even be requested, let alone approved. Our strategic partnership with Neurogenesis Research Solutions had compressed this timeline to 6 months through innovative research methodologies and accelerated documentation processes that leverage specialized expertise and established regulatory relationships that neither organization could have accessed independently. The partnership had created synergistic capabilities that exceeded the sum of individual organizational strengths, while sharing development risks and resource requirements. The FDA's decision to grant fast-track designation was based on breakthrough research findings that emerged from combining Sterling Pharmaceuticals' existing clinical data with Neurogenesis Research Solutions' proprietary research methodologies and advanced technological capabilities. The collaboration had identified novel therapeutic mechanisms that addressed underlying neurological damage rather than simply managing symptoms, representing genuine innovation in an area where treatment options had remained largely unchanged for decades. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the FDA regulatory scientist responsible for reviewing our fast-track application, specifically noted in her approval documentation that the research approach demonstrated through our strategic partnership represented exactly the kind of innovative collaboration that regulatory authorities hoped to encourage through expedited review processes. Her comments indicated that the partnership model we had developed could serve as a framework for other pharmaceutical companies seeking to accelerate development of breakthrough therapies through strategic collaboration. The regulatory success generated immediate attention throughout the pharmaceutical industry, as fast-track designations for neurological therapeutics were relatively rare and typically required years of development effort by major pharmaceutical companies with extensive regulatory experience and substantial research capabilities. The fact that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had achieved this designation through a strategic partnership with a specialized biotechnology firm demonstrated an innovative approach that challenged conventional assumptions about pharmaceutical development requirements. Industry publications began featuring analyses of our strategic partnership model, with pharmaceutical business analysts describing the collaboration as a potential template for how mid-size pharmaceutical companies could compete effectively with major corporations through strategic alliance development, rather than attempting to replicate large-scale internal capabilities. The attention validated my assessment that strategic partnerships could provide competitive advantages that traditional development approaches could not achieve. More significantly, the regulatory success created measurable financial impact that demonstrated the strategic transformation framework's ability to generate superior business results through systematic strategic innovation. The fast-track designation increased the estimated market value of our neurological therapeutic by approximately $120 million, while reducing projected development costs by 38% through expedited regulatory processes and enhanced FDA guidance. The financial impact was immediately visible in Sterling Pharmaceuticals' quarterly performance metrics and market valuation. Industry analysts upgraded their assessment of our pipeline value and growth prospects based on the regulatory milestone and the strategic partnership model that had enabled its achievement. The success provided concrete evidence that innovative strategic approaches could generate superior returns on research and development investment, while reducing development risks through collaborative expertise sharing. The breakthrough also attracted attention from potential strategic partners, who recognized that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had developed replicable methodologies for accelerating pharmaceutical development through strategic collaboration. Within 2 weeks of the fast-track announcement, I received inquiries from 4 additional biotechnology firms and 2 international pharmaceutical companies seeking to explore similar partnership opportunities. These inquiries validated my assessment that Sterling Pharmaceuticals could establish market leadership in strategic partnership development, creating sustainable competitive advantages through collaborative relationships that provided access to specialized capabilities while sharing development costs and risks. The partnership model we had pioneered was generating market recognition as an innovative approach to pharmaceutical development that could be scaled to address multiple therapeutic areas and development challenges. However, the most significant aspect of this first real victory was its impact on internal organizational dynamics at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. The regulatory success and industry attention had created undeniable evidence that my strategic approach could deliver extraordinary results that current leadership methods had been unable to achieve, despite significantly greater resource allocation and organizational focus. Board members who had expressed concerns about strategic direction under Sophia's leadership began asking pointed questions about how the regulatory milestone had been achieved, and whether similar strategic innovations could be applied to other development challenges facing Sterling Pharmaceuticals. The questions indicated growing recognition that systematic strategic thinking and industry expertise were generating superior results compared to simplified approaches that dismissed analytical rigor as unnecessarily complex. Dr. Margaret Chen requested a private briefing on the strategic partnership model and its potential applications to other areas of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' operations. During our discussion, she observed that the regulatory success demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative strategic leadership that pharmaceutical companies needed to compete effectively in increasingly complex market environments. Her assessment was particularly significant because Dr. Chen possessed extensive pharmaceutical industry experience and understood the rarity and importance of fast-track designations for neurological therapeutics. Her recognition that the achievement represented genuine strategic innovation rather than fortunate timing or external market conditions validated the systematic analytical approach underlying the strategic transformation framework. James Morrison expressed similar recognition of the strategic significance of our regulatory milestone, noting that the partnership model addressed fundamental challenges facing mid-size pharmaceutical companies seeking to compete with major corporations through collaborative approaches, rather than attempting to replicate large-scale internal capabilities. His observations indicated growing board appreciation for strategic thinking that leveraged organizational strengths while addressing capability limitations through innovative alliance structures. The board's response to our regulatory success created momentum for expanded application of strategic partnership principles to other areas of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' operations. Board members began requesting analysis of additional partnership opportunities and strategic alliance possibilities that could address other competitive challenges using similar collaborative approaches. This organizational momentum provided the platform I needed to begin implementing comprehensive elements of the strategic transformation framework, rather than limiting strategic innovation to pilot initiatives operating within existing analytical responsibilities. The regulatory success had created credibility for systematic strategic approaches that enabled broader organizational discussion of transformation possibilities. The first real victory also generated external validation that enhanced Sterling Pharmaceuticals' industry reputation and market positioning. Pharmaceutical industry conferences began inviting me to present case studies of our strategic partnership model, providing platforms for demonstrating thought leadership in collaborative development approaches that other companies were seeking to understand and potentially replicate. The speaking opportunities created additional networking possibilities with potential strategic partners, regulatory experts, and industry leaders who recognized the innovation underlying our collaborative development methodology. These relationships would prove valuable for expanding the network of strategic alliances that could support comprehensive implementation of the strategic transformation framework. More importantly, the industry recognition positioned Sterling Pharmaceuticals as an innovative leader in strategic partnership development, rather than a traditional mid-size pharmaceutical company struggling to compete with major corporations through conventional approaches. This repositioning created market differentiation that enhanced our attractiveness to potential partners, investors, and acquisition candidates who valued innovative strategic capabilities. The financial markets responded positively to Sterling Pharmaceuticals' regulatory milestone and the strategic partnership model that had enabled its achievement. Our stock price increased by 23% in the month following the fast-track announcement, reflecting investor confidence in our pipeline prospects and strategic development capabilities. The market response validated the business value of systematic strategic innovation while creating additional resources for expanded strategic initiatives. The investment community's recognition of our strategic capabilities also attracted attention from institutional investors who specialized in pharmaceutical companies with innovative development approaches and strong pipeline prospects. Several investment firms requested meetings to discuss Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic direction and growth opportunities, providing access to capital resources that could support expanded implementation of the strategic transformation framework. Perhaps most significantly, the first real victory demonstrated that my strategic capabilities could generate results that transcended organizational limitations and leadership constraints. The regulatory success had been achieved through systematic strategic innovation that operated independently of current leadership approval, while creating measurable value that enhanced Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive position and market prospects. The achievement proved that waiting for organizational recognition of strategic capabilities was unnecessary, when those capabilities could generate undeniable results through direct implementation and systematic execution. The regulatory milestone represented concrete evidence that strategic innovation could create its own platform for recognition, through measurable performance that made external validation inevitable. The success also revealed the compound nature of strategic achievements, as the regulatory milestone created momentum for additional strategic initiatives, while building credibility for comprehensive transformation approaches. The first real victory was generating opportunities for expanded strategic partnership development, enhanced board engagement with strategic innovation, and increased market recognition of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' collaborative development capabilities. The breakthrough had transformed Sterling Pharmaceuticals' trajectory from strategic drift under current leadership to strategic innovation that was attracting industry attention and generating superior business results. The regulatory milestone provided concrete proof that systematic strategic thinking could address pharmaceutical industry challenges more effectively than simplified approaches that dismissed analytical rigor and industry expertise. The first real victory established the foundation for demonstrating that Sterling Pharmaceuticals possessed internal capabilities for achieving market leadership through strategic innovation rather than traditional approaches focused on incremental improvements to existing operations. The regulatory success represented the beginning of comprehensive validation that would ultimately prove the strategic transformation framework could deliver extraordinary results that would reposition Sterling Pharmaceuticals as an industry leader in collaborative pharmaceutical development. The momentum generated by this breakthrough achievement would soon create opportunities for implementing broader elements of the strategic transformation framework while building toward comprehensive organizational recognition of the strategic leadership capabilities that had made such extraordinary results possible through systematic innovation and strategic excellence. The extraordinary success of our regulatory milestone and the growing industry recognition of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' innovative strategic partnership model inevitably attracted resistance from those who viewed my achievements as threats to established organizational hierarchies and existing leadership structures. The opposition that emerged during this critical period would test my resilience and strategic thinking while revealing the fundamental tensions between innovation and institutional inertia that define transformation efforts within established organizations. The resistance manifested most prominently through Sophia's increasingly vocal criticism of what she characterized as unauthorized strategic initiatives that were supposedly undermining coherent organizational leadership and creating confusion about Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic direction. Her response to our regulatory success demonstrated the defensive reactions that innovation often generates from leaders whose authority is threatened by evidence of alternative approaches delivering superior results. During a senior leadership meeting convened to discuss our fast-track designation and its implications for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic planning, Sophia argued that the regulatory milestone represented an isolated success that should not be interpreted as validation of broader strategic approaches. She contended that the achievement resulted primarily from favorable regulatory conditions and timing rather than systematic strategic innovation, and that expanding similar initiatives would create operational complexity that could undermine organizational efficiency. Her critique revealed fundamental misunderstanding of both the regulatory achievement itself and the strategic partnership model that had enabled its realization. Fast-track designations were granted based on rigorous scientific evidence and therapeutic innovation rather than regulatory favorability or timing considerations. The FDA's decision reflected genuine breakthrough potential that had emerged through systematic collaboration between Sterling Pharmaceuticals and Neurogenesis Research Solutions. More problematically, Sophia's opposition to expanding strategic partnership initiatives demonstrated resistance to approaches that could address Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most urgent competitive challenges. Her preference for simplified organizational structures and traditional development approaches reflected comfort with familiar methods, rather than strategic assessment of what competitive conditions actually required for sustainable success. The tension escalated when Sophia requested that I submit all external partnership discussions and strategic initiative proposals for her approval before proceeding with implementation or further development. This directive represented an attempt to reassert organizational control over strategic innovation by channeling all initiatives through leadership that had consistently demonstrated limited understanding of pharmaceutical industry requirements and systematic strategic thinking. Sophia's directive created a fundamental conflict between continuing strategic innovation that was generating measurable results and accepting organizational constraints that would prevent effective response to competitive challenges threatening Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term viability. The choice was between organizational compliance and strategic effectiveness, between maintaining harmony and pursuing excellence. The situation was complicated by support for Sophia's position from David Morrison, Sterling Pharmaceuticals' chief financial officer, who expressed concerns about the financial implications of expanded strategic partnership initiatives. Morrison argued that collaborative development approaches created accounting complexities and shared revenue arrangements that could reduce Sterling Pharmaceuticals' financial performance compared to traditional internal development approaches. Morrison's financial analysis focused exclusively on short-term cost considerations, without acknowledging the strategic benefits and long-term value creation that partnership approaches enabled through accelerated development timelines, reduced risk exposure, and enhanced competitive positioning. His assessment reflected traditional financial thinking that prioritized immediate cost control over strategic investment in capabilities that could generate superior long-term returns. The combination of leadership opposition and financial resistance created organizational momentum against expanding strategic partnership initiatives, despite their demonstrated effectiveness in achieving regulatory milestones and industry recognition. The resistance reflected institutional preferences for familiar approaches rather than analytical assessment of strategic requirements and competitive realities. The opposition intensified when Sophia presented an alternative strategic framework during the quarterly board meeting that emphasized internal development capabilities and simplified operational structures rather than collaborative approaches and strategic alliance development. Her presentation portrayed strategic partnerships as unnecessary complications that diverted resources from core organizational strengths while creating dependencies on external organizations that could compromise Sterling Pharmaceuticals' autonomy and control. Sophia's alternative framework revealed the philosophical differences underlying organizational tensions about strategic direction. Her approach prioritized organizational simplicity and internal control over strategic effectiveness and competitive advantage. The framework emphasized maintaining existing approaches rather than adapting to evolving industry requirements and emerging competitive challenges. The board's response to Sophia's presentation was notably reserved, reflecting their growing understanding of the strategic challenges Sterling Pharmaceuticals faced and their appreciation for the regulatory success that strategic partnership approaches had already generated. Several board members asked pointed questions about how internal development approaches would address timeline and capability limitations that strategic partnerships had proven able to overcome. Dr. Margaret Chen's questions were particularly probing, focusing on specific competitive challenges that Sterling Pharmaceuticals faced and how simplified approaches would generate superior results compared to collaborative methods that had already demonstrated measurable success. Her inquiries revealed skepticism about abandoning strategic innovations that were producing concrete achievements in favor of traditional approaches that had proven inadequate for addressing current competitive conditions. James Morrison challenged Sophia's assessment of strategic partnership complexity, noting that successful pharmaceutical companies increasingly relied on collaborative development approaches to access specialized capabilities and share development risks in an industry where individual organizations rarely possessed all the expertise required for breakthrough innovation. His observations indicated board recognition that industry evolution required strategic adaptation, rather than adherence to traditional approaches. The board discussion revealed fundamental disagreement about whether Sterling Pharmaceuticals should pursue strategic innovation that was generating measurable results, or maintain traditional approaches that prioritized organizational simplicity over competitive effectiveness. The tension reflected broader questions about risk tolerance, change management, and strategic leadership that would determine Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term prospects. The resistance also emerged from unexpected sources within Sterling Pharmaceuticals' internal operations. Several department heads who had not been directly involved in strategic partnership initiatives expressed concerns about resource allocation and organizational priorities that reflected their investments in existing approaches and their uncertainty about how strategic innovation might affect their departmental responsibilities. Dr. Robert Chen, head of Internal Research and Development, argued that strategic partnerships created dependencies on external organizations that could compromise Sterling Pharmaceuticals' proprietary research capabilities and intellectual property protection. His concerns reflected genuine considerations about maintaining competitive advantages through internal capabilities rather than collaborative approaches that required information sharing and joint intellectual property arrangements. Similarly, Patricia Williams, Director of Regulatory Affairs, expressed reservations about collaborative regulatory strategies that required coordination with external partners who might have different priorities and approaches to regulatory compliance. Her concerns about maintaining control over regulatory processes reflected legitimate operational considerations about ensuring consistent quality and compliance standards. These internal concerns were professionally reasonable and operationally significant, reflecting genuine challenges associated with implementing strategic partnerships within organizational structures and processes designed for internal development approaches. The resistance indicated that strategic innovation required not only external partnership development, but also internal organizational adaptation to support collaborative approaches effectively. However, the most sophisticated opposition came from external pharmaceutical industry consultants, who had been advising Sterling Pharmaceuticals on strategic planning and organizational development. These consultants had significant financial interests in maintaining traditional consulting relationships that strategic partnership approaches could potentially displace or reduce. The consulting firms argued that strategic partnerships created coordination complexities and intellectual property risks that outweighed potential benefits from accelerated development timelines and shared capabilities. Their analysis emphasized potential negative outcomes, while minimizing demonstrated achievements and measurable results that partnership approaches had already generated. The consultant opposition was particularly challenging because their analysis appeared objective and professionally credible, while reflecting biases toward traditional approaches that supported their ongoing consulting engagements. Their resistance represented sophisticated institutional opposition to innovation that threatened established professional relationships and revenue arrangements. The combined resistance from internal leadership, financial management, departmental operations, and external consultants created systematic opposition to strategic innovation, despite its demonstrated effectiveness in achieving regulatory milestones and industry recognition. The opposition reflected institutional inertia that prioritized maintaining familiar approaches over pursuing strategic adaptation that competitive conditions required. The resistance taught me valuable lessons about organizational dynamics and change management that would prove essential for comprehensive implementation of the strategic transformation framework. Innovation within established organizations inevitably threatens existing structures, relationships, and assumptions about effective approaches, generating defensive reactions from those whose positions depend on maintaining traditional methods. Understanding these dynamics enabled me to develop more sophisticated strategies for managing organizational resistance, while continuing strategic innovation that was essential for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive success. The opposition clarified that comprehensive transformation would require not only demonstrating strategic effectiveness, but also addressing legitimate operational concerns and managing transition processes that minimize disruption while maximizing strategic benefits. The resistance also revealed the importance of building coalitions among stakeholders who understood strategic requirements and appreciated innovation results, rather than attempting to convince opponents whose positions were threatened by change. Board members with pharmaceutical industry expertise and external partners who benefited from collaborative approaches represented natural allies for strategic innovation initiatives. Most importantly, the skeptics and doubters demonstrated that organizational opposition often validates the significance of innovation rather than indicating problems with strategic approaches. Resistance typically emerges when innovation threatens established interests and conventional thinking, suggesting that strategic changes are substantial enough to challenge existing assumptions and create genuine competitive advantages. The experience taught me that persistence through resistance is essential for implementing strategic innovation that can address competitive challenges threatening organizational viability. The opposition represented normal institutional responses to change, rather than evidence that strategic partnership approaches were inappropriate or ineffective for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' circumstances. The resistance period ultimately strengthened my conviction that strategic innovation was essential for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term success, while clarifying the organizational and political challenges that comprehensive transformation would require. The skeptics and doubters had inadvertently validated the significance of strategic partnership approaches by demonstrating how profoundly they challenged existing assumptions about pharmaceutical development and organizational effectiveness. The opposition also created opportunities to refine strategic approaches and address legitimate operational concerns while maintaining focus on competitive requirements and measurable results. The resistance provided valuable feedback about implementation challenges while reinforcing the importance of systematic strategic thinking that could address both competitive pressures and organizational dynamics simultaneously. The combination of extraordinary success and systematic opposition that characterized the previous months provided crucial insights that enabled me to develop a more sophisticated approach to implementing comprehensive strategic transformation at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. The resistance I had encountered revealed important organizational dynamics and stakeholder concerns that required strategic attention, while the regulatory milestone demonstrated that innovative approaches could deliver results that transcended traditional limitations and conventional expectations. The strategic pivot that emerged from this analysis represented evolution rather than abandonment of the strategic transformation framework. The core principles underlying collaborative development, international expansion, and research optimization remained fundamentally sound and demonstrably effective. However, the implementation approach required refinement to address legitimate operational concerns while building broader organizational support for strategic innovation that competitive conditions made essential for long-term viability. The first element of my strategic pivot involved developing more comprehensive stakeholder engagement processes that addressed specific concerns expressed by internal departments and external advisors. Rather than dismissing resistance as institutional inertia or political opposition, I began treating skeptical feedback as valuable input for improving implementation strategies and addressing operational challenges that could compromise strategic effectiveness if left unresolved. Dr. Robert Chen's concerns about intellectual property protection in collaborative development arrangements represented legitimate operational considerations that required systematic attention rather than dismissive responses. His reservations reflected genuine expertise about maintaining competitive advantages through proprietary research capabilities, and his concerns deserved thoughtful analysis rather than organizational override through executive authority. I initiated comprehensive discussions with Dr. Chen about intellectual property management strategies that could preserve Sterling Pharmaceuticals' proprietary advantages while enabling collaborative development approaches that accelerated innovation timelines and enhanced research capabilities. These discussions revealed opportunities to structure strategic partnerships through carefully designed intellectual property sharing arrangements that protected core proprietary technologies while enabling collaborative access to complementary capabilities. The intellectual property framework that emerged from these discussions created systematic protections for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' most valuable proprietary research, while establishing clear protocols for collaborative development that enhanced, rather than compromised, our competitive positioning. The framework addressed Dr. Chen's concerns while maintaining the collaborative advantages that had enabled our regulatory milestone achievement. Similarly, Patricia Williams' reservations about regulatory coordination in partnership arrangements reflected professional expertise about maintaining compliance standards and regulatory relationship quality. Her concerns about ensuring consistent regulatory approaches across collaborative development initiatives deserved systematic attention rather than organizational dismissal or political circumvention. The regulatory coordination framework I developed with Patricia Williams established comprehensive protocols for managing collaborative regulatory strategies that maintained Sterling Pharmaceuticals' regulatory relationship quality while leveraging partner expertise and capabilities. The framework created systematic approaches to regulatory coordination that addressed her professional concerns while preserving the regulatory advantages that strategic partnerships could provide. These stakeholder engagement processes demonstrated that addressing resistance through systematic problem-solving rather than organizational confrontation could transform potential opponents into strategic allies while improving implementation approaches. The refined frameworks that emerged from these discussions were more sophisticated and operationally robust than the initial approaches I had developed independently. The second element of my strategic pivot involved expanding the analytical foundation underlying strategic partnership selection and international expansion planning. The success of our collaboration with Neurogenesis Research Solutions demonstrated the potential value of strategic partnerships. But comprehensive transformation required more systematic approaches to identifying and evaluating potential partners across multiple therapeutic areas and geographic markets. I developed enhanced analytical methodologies for assessing strategic partnership opportunities that incorporated lessons learned from our initial collaboration while addressing concerns about due diligence, compatibility assessment, and risk management that had emerged through stakeholder feedback and organizational resistance discussions. The enhanced partnership evaluation framework incorporated detailed assessments of potential partners' research capabilities, regulatory expertise, financial stability, intellectual property portfolios, and organizational compatibility with Sterling Pharmaceuticals' operational culture and strategic objectives. The framework provided systematic approaches to partnership selection that addressed operational concerns while identifying collaborative opportunities that could generate superior results compared to internal development approaches. The international expansion analysis was similarly enhanced through more comprehensive market assessments that incorporated detailed evaluations of regulatory environments, competitive dynamics, intellectual property protection standards, and partnership opportunities across target geographic markets. The enhanced analysis provided more sophisticated understanding of international expansion requirements while identifying specific strategic alliance opportunities that could accelerate market entry and reduce associated risks. The analytical enhancements demonstrated commitment to rigorous strategic planning that addressed stakeholder concerns about systematic evaluation and risk management, while maintaining focus on strategic opportunities that could generate competitive advantages and superior business results. The third element of my strategic pivot involved developing more sophisticated communication strategies that position strategic innovation as organizational capability enhancement rather than leadership challenge or traditional approach replacement. The resistance I had encountered reflected concerns about organizational disruption and leadership displacement, rather than analytical disagreement about strategic requirements or competitive realities. The refined communication approach emphasized how strategic partnerships and international expansion could enhance existing organizational capabilities while addressing competitive challenges that internal capabilities alone were insufficient to resolve effectively. The messaging focused on capability augmentation rather than organizational replacement, addressing concerns about institutional disruption while maintaining focus on strategic requirements. The communication strategy also incorporated more systematic documentation of strategic rationale, implementation planning, and performance measurement that addressed concerns about accountability and organizational transparency. The enhanced documentation provided stakeholders with comprehensive understanding of strategic initiatives while enabling systematic evaluation of results and continuous improvement of approaches based on empirical evidence and operational experience. Most importantly, the communication refinements positioned strategic innovation as professional responsibility and competitive necessity rather than personal initiative or individual ambition. The messaging emphasized organizational requirements and industry evolution rather than individual capabilities or leadership aspirations, addressing concerns about motivation and authority while maintaining focus on strategic effectiveness and competitive positioning. The fourth element of my strategic pivot involved expanding the scope of strategic partnership development beyond research and development collaboration to include manufacturing optimization, regulatory expertise sharing, and market access enhancement. The success of our initial partnership had demonstrated the potential value of collaborative approaches, but comprehensive transformation required applying partnership principles across all areas where external capabilities could enhance Sterling Pharmaceuticals' competitive positioning. The expanded partnership framework incorporated opportunities for manufacturing partnerships that could reduce production costs while accessing specialized capabilities for complex pharmaceutical formulations. The manufacturing partnerships addressed cost pressures and capability limitations, while maintaining quality standards and intellectual property protections that were essential for competitive positioning. The regulatory partnership opportunities focused on accessing specialized expertise for international regulatory submissions and compliance management that could accelerate global market expansion, while reducing regulatory risks associated with unfamiliar jurisdictions and evolving compliance requirements. The market access partnerships provided opportunities for collaborative approaches to healthcare provider relationship development, insurance coverage negotiation, and patient access program implementation that could enhance commercial success while sharing marketing costs and risks across multiple partners. The expanded partnership framework demonstrated that collaborative principles could generate value across all areas of pharmaceutical operations, rather than being limited to research and development activities. The comprehensive approach addressed broader competitive challenges while creating multiple opportunities for strategic alliance development and capability enhancement. The fifth element of my strategic pivot involved developing systematic approaches to organizational change management that addressed transition challenges while maintaining operational effectiveness during strategic transformation implementation. The resistance I had encountered reflected legitimate concerns about organizational disruption and operational continuity that required systematic attention rather than dismissive responses or authoritarian override. The change management framework incorporated detailed transition planning, stakeholder communication protocols, training and development programs, and performance monitoring systems that ensured strategic transformation enhanced rather than compromised organizational effectiveness. The framework addressed concerns about operational disruption while maintaining momentum towards strategic objectives and competitive positioning improvements. The change management approach also incorporated systematic feedback mechanisms that enabled continuous refinement of implementation strategies based on operational experience and stakeholder input. The feedback systems addressed concerns about accountability and responsiveness while ensuring strategic initiatives remained aligned with organizational capabilities and competitive requirements. The transition planning incorporated phased implementation approaches that enabled systematic validation of strategic innovations before comprehensive organizational commitment, addressing concerns about risk management while maintaining focus on strategic transformation that competitive conditions required for long-term viability. The strategic pivot culminated in presentation of an enhanced strategic transformation framework that incorporated all refinements and stakeholder feedback while maintaining focus on competitive requirements and measurable business results. The enhanced framework addressed operational concerns and organizational dynamics while preserving the strategic innovations that had generated regulatory milestones and industry recognition. The presentation to the Board Strategic Planning Committee demonstrated how stakeholder engagement and analytical enhancement had improved strategic approaches while addressing legitimate concerns about implementation challenges and organizational impacts. The refined framework represented more sophisticated strategic thinking that incorporated operational expertise and stakeholder perspectives while maintaining focus on competitive effectiveness and business results. Board member response to the enhanced framework was notably positive, reflecting appreciation for systematic stakeholder engagement and analytical refinement that addressed concerns while maintaining strategic focus. Dr. Margaret Chen observed that the enhanced approach demonstrated exactly the kind of sophisticated strategic leadership that pharmaceutical companies required for navigating complex competitive environments while managing organizational transformation effectively. James Morrison noted that the refined international expansion planning incorporated comprehensive risk assessment and systematic partnership evaluation that addressed concerns about international market entry, while maintaining focus on growth opportunities that could generate substantial business results. The positive board response validated the strategic pivot approach while creating momentum for comprehensive implementation of enhanced strategic transformation initiatives. The refinements had transformed potential opposition into strategic support while improving implementation approaches and addressing operational challenges that could have compromised strategic effectiveness. The strategic pivot demonstrated that sophisticated strategic leadership required adaptability and stakeholder engagement, rather than rigid adherence to initial approaches or dismissive responses to organizational feedback. The enhanced framework that emerged from systematic refinement was more operationally robust and organizationally sustainable than initial approaches, while maintaining strategic focus on competitive requirements and business results. The pivot established foundation for comprehensive strategic transformation that addressed competitive challenges while building organizational support for innovation that would ultimately determine Sterling Pharmaceuticals' long-term viability and market positioning in an increasingly complex and competitive pharmaceutical industry environment. The months following my strategic pivot marked the beginning of systematic infrastructure development that would enable comprehensive implementation of the enhanced strategic transformation framework across all areas of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' operations. The refined approach that emerged from stakeholder engagement and analytical enhancement required corresponding organizational capabilities and systematic processes that could support strategic transformation while maintaining operational excellence and business continuity. The foundation-building phase required careful orchestration of multiple concurrent initiatives that would create synergistic capabilities for strategic partnership development, international expansion, research optimization, and organizational change management. The systematic approach ensured that infrastructure development proceeded in coordinated fashion rather than creating competing priorities or resource conflicts that could compromise overall effectiveness. The first component of foundation building involved establishing a strategic partnership development center that would provide systematic capabilities for identifying, evaluating, implementing, and managing collaborative relationships across all therapeutic areas and business functions. The center represented institutionalization of partnership approaches that had generated our regulatory milestone, while creating scalable methodologies for expanding collaborative development across Sterling Pharmaceuticals' entire pipeline and operational structure. The Strategic Partnership Development Center incorporated dedicated analytical capabilities for partnership opportunity assessment, due diligence processes for evaluating potential collaborators, legal frameworks for structuring collaborative agreements, and project management systems for coordinating partnership implementation and ongoing relationship management. The center provided systematic approaches to partnership development that addressed stakeholder concerns about risk management and operational coordination, while maximizing strategic benefits from collaborative approaches. The center also incorporated comprehensive intellectual property management capabilities that addressed Dr. Robert Chen's concerns about protecting proprietary research while enabling collaborative development. The intellectual property framework provided systematic protocols for technology sharing, joint research coordination, and competitive advantage preservation that enabled partnership benefits while maintaining Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic positioning and market differentiation. The regulatory coordination capabilities within the center addressed Patricia Williams' concerns about maintaining compliance standards and regulatory relationship quality across collaborative initiatives. The regulatory framework provided systematic approaches to coordinating regulatory strategies with external partners, while preserving Sterling Pharmaceuticals' regulatory expertise and compliance reputation. The establishment of the Strategic Partnership Development Center required significant organizational investment and systematic capability development, but the center created institutional infrastructure that could support comprehensive strategic transformation, while addressing operational concerns that had generated resistance to earlier partnership initiatives. The center represented permanent organizational commitment to collaborative approaches rather than temporary experimental programs. The second component of foundation building involved developing comprehensive international expansion capabilities that could support systematic market entry across target geographic regions through strategic alliance development and direct market establishment. The international expansion infrastructure addressed competitive requirements for global market presence while creating systematic approaches to managing geographic diversification and international operational complexity. The international expansion capabilities incorporated detailed market intelligence systems that provided ongoing assessment of regulatory environments, competitive dynamics, and strategic opportunities across target markets. The market intelligence infrastructure enabled systematic evaluation of expansion opportunities while supporting strategic decision-making about resource allocation and partnership development priorities. The international infrastructure also incorporated specialized regulatory expertise for managing compliance requirements across diverse jurisdictions with varying approval processes and ongoing regulatory obligations. The regulatory capabilities addressed concerns about international compliance complexity while creating competitive advantages through accelerated market entry and enhanced regulatory relationship management. The cultural and operational adaptation capabilities within the international expansion infrastructure provided systematic approaches to managing geographic diversity in partnership relationships, market access strategies, and operational coordination across time zones and cultural contexts. The adaptation capabilities addressed practical challenges associated with international expansion while creating organizational competencies that could support sustainable global operations. The international expansion infrastructure required substantial investment in specialized expertise and systematic capability development, but the infrastructure created permanent organizational capabilities for global market participation rather than ad hoc approaches to individual market opportunities. The infrastructure positioned Sterling Pharmaceuticals for systematic international growth that could generate substantial revenue diversification and competitive positioning benefits. The third component of foundation building involved establishing enhanced research and development capabilities that could support breakthrough therapy development while optimizing resource allocation and development timeline management. The research enhancement infrastructure addressed competitive requirements for innovation leadership while creating systematic approaches to managing research portfolio complexity and development risk management. The enhanced research capabilities incorporated advanced research methodologies that combined internal expertise with external partnership opportunities to accelerate discovery timelines and enhance innovation potential. The research infrastructure enabled systematic application of collaborative approaches to research challenges while maintaining Sterling Pharmaceuticals' proprietary research advantages and intellectual property protection. The research infrastructure also incorporated comprehensive project portfolio management systems that enabled systematic evaluation of research priorities, resource allocation optimization, and development timeline coordination across multiple concurrent initiatives. The portfolio management capabilities addressed concerns about research focus and resource efficiency, while enabling systematic pursuit of breakthrough opportunities that could generate substantial competitive advantages. The clinical development capabilities within the research infrastructure provided systematic approaches to managing clinical trial design, regulatory coordination, and partnership collaboration that could accelerate development timelines while maintaining quality standards and regulatory compliance. The clinical capabilities addressed operational challenges associated with complex development projects while creating systematic approaches to managing regulatory requirements and partnership coordination. The research and development infrastructure required significant investment in specialized expertise and advanced technological capabilities, but the infrastructure created permanent organizational advantages for innovation leadership and competitive positioning that could support long-term market differentiation and financial performance. The fourth component of foundation building involved developing comprehensive organizational change management capabilities that could support strategic transformation while maintaining operational effectiveness and employee engagement throughout transition processes. The change management infrastructure addressed stakeholder concerns about organizational disruption while creating systematic approaches to managing transformation complexity and ensuring successful implementation. The change management capabilities incorporated detailed communication systems that provided transparent information about strategic transformation rationale, implementation planning, and expected outcomes for all organizational stakeholders. The communication infrastructure addressed concerns about transparency and accountability while building organizational support for strategic initiatives through systematic information sharing and stakeholder engagement. The training and development capabilities within the change management infrastructure provided systematic approaches to building organizational competencies required for strategic transformation implementation. The training capabilities addressed concerns about employee preparation and capability development, while ensuring organizational readiness for new operational approaches and partnership management requirements. The performance measurement and feedback systems within the change management infrastructure provided systematic approaches to monitoring transformation progress and refining implementation strategies based on operational experience and stakeholder feedback. The measurement capabilities addressed concerns about accountability and continuous improvement, while enabling systematic evaluation of strategic initiative effectiveness. The change management infrastructure required substantial organizational investment and systematic capability development, but the infrastructure created permanent organizational advantages for managing strategic transformation and operational adaptation that would support long-term competitive positioning and organizational effectiveness. The fifth component of foundation building involved establishing comprehensive financial management capabilities that could support strategic transformation through sophisticated investment analysis, partnership financial coordination, and international expansion financial management. The financial infrastructure addressed stakeholder concerns about financial complexity while creating systematic approaches to managing strategic investment and measuring business results. The financial capabilities incorporated advanced analytical systems for evaluating strategic investment opportunities, measuring partnership financial performance, and coordinating international expansion financial management across diverse jurisdictions and currency environments. The financial infrastructure enabled systematic evaluation of strategic initiatives while addressing concerns about financial accountability and return on investment measurement. The financial infrastructure also incorporated specialized expertise for managing partnership financial arrangements, international expansion funding requirements, and strategic investment evaluation that addressed David Morrison's concerns about financial complexity, while creating systematic approaches to financial management that could support strategic transformation objectives. The risk management capabilities within the financial infrastructure provided systematic approaches to evaluating and managing financial risks associated with strategic partnerships, international expansion, and research and development investment. The risk management capabilities addressed concerns about financial exposure while creating systematic approaches to managing strategic investment that could generate superior business results. The integration of all foundation components created comprehensive organizational infrastructure that could support systematic implementation of the enhanced strategic transformation framework, while addressing stakeholder concerns and operational requirements. The foundation provided permanent organizational capabilities for strategic partnership development, international expansion, research optimization, change management, and financial coordination that positions Sterling Pharmaceuticals for sustained competitive advantage and market leadership. The foundation building process also created significant internal momentum for strategic transformation by demonstrating organizational commitment to systematic capability development and strategic innovation. The infrastructure investment validated strategic transformation priorities, while creating tangible evidence of organizational dedication to competitive positioning and long-term viability. Board member response to the foundation development was notably positive, reflecting appreciation for systematic infrastructure investment that addressed competitive requirements while building permanent organizational capabilities. Dr. Margaret Chen observed that the foundation represented exactly the kind of strategic infrastructure investment that pharmaceutical companies required for sustainable competitive advantage in increasingly complex market environments. James Morrison noted that the international expansion infrastructure created systematic capabilities for global market participation that could generate substantial revenue diversification and competitive positioning benefits while managing risks associated with geographic expansion and cultural adaptation. The positive board response validated the foundation-building approach while creating momentum for comprehensive strategic transformation implementation. The infrastructure development had created organizational readiness for strategic initiatives while addressing stakeholder concerns and building systematic capabilities that could support long-term competitive advantage. The foundation building phase demonstrated that strategic transformation required systematic infrastructure development and organizational capability building, rather than ad hoc initiative implementation or individual project management. The comprehensive infrastructure that emerged from systematic foundation development positioned Sterling Pharmaceuticals for strategic transformation that could address competitive challenges while generating sustainable business results and market positioning advantages. The culmination of 18 months of systematic strategic development arrived on a May morning, when Sterling Pharmaceuticals received notification that our comprehensive therapeutic platform for neurological disorders had been selected for inclusion in the National Institutes of Health Breakthrough Therapy Collaborative Research Initiative. This designation represented the most significant achievement in Sterling Pharmaceuticals' history and validated every element of the strategic transformation framework through outcomes that exceeded our most optimistic projections. The NIH Breakthrough Therapy designation encompassed 3 distinct neurological therapeutics that our strategic partnership network had developed through coordinated research initiatives spanning multiple therapeutic areas and collaborative relationships. The designation acknowledged that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had established leadership in breakthrough therapy development through innovative approaches that addressed previously intractable neurological conditions with therapeutic mechanisms that represented fundamental advances in medical science. The significance of this achievement extended far beyond individual product recognition. The NIH designation validated Sterling Pharmaceuticals as a premier research organization capable of systematic breakthrough innovation rather than incremental improvement to existing therapeutic approaches. The designation positioned Sterling Pharmaceuticals among the elite pharmaceutical companies recognized for transformational medical research that could address major unmet medical needs through scientific innovation. The therapeutic platform that received NIH recognition had emerged through systematic implementation of strategic partnership principles across our entire research and development portfolio. The breakthrough represented coordinated innovation that combined Sterling Pharmaceuticals' internal expertise with specialized capabilities from 4 strategic research partners, creating synergistic research capabilities that none of the individual organizations could have achieved independently. The Alzheimer's therapeutic that had originated through our partnership with Neurogenesis Research Solutions formed the foundation of the platform, but the comprehensive approach incorporated additional therapeutics for Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis that had been developed through strategic partnerships with specialized research organizations focusing on different aspects of neurological disorder treatment and prevention. The integrated therapeutic platform represented systematic application of breakthrough research methodologies across multiple neurological conditions, creating comprehensive treatment approaches that addressed underlying neurological damage rather than simply managing symptomatic manifestations. The platform demonstrated that strategic partnership coordination could generate research breakthroughs that transformed entire therapeutic categories rather than producing incremental improvements to existing treatment options. The NIH recognition included substantial research funding that would accelerate clinical development timelines while providing validation from the most prestigious medical research institution in the United States. The funding designation acknowledged that Sterling Pharmaceuticals' research platform represented exactly the kind of innovative medical research that federal agencies prioritized for accelerated development and comprehensive support. Dr. Amanda Richardson, the NIH program director responsible for breakthrough therapy evaluation, specifically noted in her announcement that Sterling Pharmaceuticals' strategic partnership model represented innovative approaches to collaborative medical research that could serve as a template for other pharmaceutical companies seeking to accelerate breakthrough therapy development through systematic coordination of specialized research capabilities. Her observations validated the strategic partnership methodology underlying our therapeutic platform, while creating industry recognition for Sterling Pharmaceuticals as a leader in collaborative research innovation. The NIH recognition established Sterling Pharmaceuticals as a model for strategic partnership development in pharmaceutical research, creating competitive differentiation that extended beyond individual therapeutic achievements. The financial impact of the NIH designation was immediate and substantial. The breakthrough therapy platform increased Sterling Pharmaceuticals' estimated market valuation by over $400 million, while positioning the company for international expansion opportunities that could generate additional revenue growth through strategic alliance development with global pharmaceutical partners. Industry analysts upgraded Sterling Pharmaceuticals' growth projections and competitive positioning assessments based on the NIH recognition and the strategic partnership model that had enabled the breakthrough achievements. The analyst upgrades reflected recognition that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had established sustainable competitive advantages through systematic strategic innovation rather than achieving temporary success through favorable market conditions or fortuitous timing. The international pharmaceutical industry responded to the NIH designation with immediate interest in strategic alliance opportunities that could provide access to Sterling Pharmaceuticals' breakthrough therapeutic platform and collaborative research methodologies. Within 2 weeks of the NIH announcement, I received partnership inquiries from pharmaceutical companies in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, seeking to establish strategic relationships that could enable regional development and marketing of our neurological therapeutics. The international interest validated the global market potential of our therapeutic platform while creating opportunities for systematic international expansion through strategic alliances that could accelerate global market entry while sharing development costs and regulatory risks with established regional partners. The international partnership opportunities represented exactly the kind of global expansion possibilities that our strategic transformation initiatives had been designed to create. The breakthrough moment also generated unprecedented internal organizational recognition of strategic partnership capabilities and systematic strategic innovation. Board members who had expressed initial skepticism about collaborative development approaches acknowledged that the NIH designation demonstrated the extraordinary potential of strategic partnership methodologies when implemented through comprehensive organizational commitment and systematic execution. Dr. Margaret Chen observed that the NIH recognition represented validation of sophisticated strategic leadership that addressed competitive requirements through systematic innovation, rather than traditional approaches that relied on incremental improvement to existing capabilities. Her assessment acknowledged that strategic transformation had generated results that conventional pharmaceutical development approaches could not have achieved within comparable timeframes or resource constraints. James Morrison noted that the international partnership opportunities emerging from the NIH designation created prospects for global revenue diversification that could position Sterling Pharmaceuticals for sustained growth across multiple geographic markets, while reducing dependence on domestic market conditions and regulatory environments. The board recognition validated strategic transformation efforts while creating momentum for expanded implementation of collaborative approaches across all areas of Sterling Pharmaceuticals' operations. The NIH breakthrough had transformed board perception of strategic partnership methodologies, from experimental initiatives to essential competitive capabilities that determined long-term organizational viability and market positioning. Perhaps most significantly, the breakthrough moment created undeniable evidence that systematic strategic innovation could generate extraordinary results that transcended organizational limitations and conventional industry assumptions about pharmaceutical development requirements and competitive positioning possibilities. The NIH designation demonstrated that Sterling Pharmaceuticals possessed internal capabilities for achieving industry leadership through strategic transformation rather than requiring external acquisition or merger to access competitive capabilities. The breakthrough proved that systematic strategic innovation could create sustainable competitive advantages that positioned mid-size pharmaceutical companies for market leadership through collaborative excellence rather than scale replication. The achievement also validated the comprehensive infrastructure development that had preceded the breakthrough moment. The Strategic Partnership Development Center had provided systematic capabilities for coordinating multiple concurrent collaborative relationships while maintaining intellectual property protection and regulatory compliance across complex partnership arrangements. The international expansion infrastructure had created organizational readiness for global market opportunities that emerged from the NIH recognition, enabling systematic evaluation and implementation of international strategic alliances without requiring emergency capability development or ad hoc partnership management. The enhanced research and development capabilities had provided the analytical and operational framework necessary for coordinating breakthrough research across multiple therapeutic areas, while maintaining systematic evaluation of research priorities and resource allocation optimization. The organizational change management infrastructure had enabled systematic coordination of complex strategic initiatives while maintaining operational effectiveness and stakeholder engagement throughout the transformation process. The change management capabilities had prevented organizational disruption while building internal support for strategic innovation that generated extraordinary business results. The comprehensive financial management capabilities had provided systematic approaches to evaluating and coordinating strategic investments while measuring partnership performance and managing international expansion financial requirements across diverse market environments and regulatory jurisdictions. The integration of all infrastructure components had created organizational capabilities that could support the complex coordination required for breakthrough achievement, while positioning Sterling Pharmaceuticals for systematic expansion of strategic transformation across additional therapeutic areas and market opportunities. The breakthrough moment represented the culmination of systematic strategic development that had transformed Sterling Pharmaceuticals from an organization struggling with competitive pressures and leadership limitations into a recognized industry leader in collaborative research, innovation, and breakthrough therapy development. The achievement demonstrated that comprehensive strategic transformation could generate results that exceeded initial objectives while creating sustainable competitive advantages that positioned organizations for continued leadership and market expansion. The NIH designation validated every element of systematic strategic innovation, while proving that collaborative excellence could transcend organizational constraints and industry assumptions about competitive requirements. The breakthrough also created recognition that strategic transformation required sustained commitment and systematic execution, rather than temporary initiative implementation or individual project achievement. The NIH designation resulted from 18 months of coordinated strategic development that built comprehensive organizational capabilities while addressing competitive challenges through innovative approaches that generated measurable business results. The transformation from organizational vulnerability to industry leadership demonstrated that systematic strategic innovation could create extraordinary outcomes for organizations willing to commit to comprehensive capability development and collaborative excellence. The breakthrough moment validated the potential for strategic transformation to generate results that surpassed conventional expectations while establishing sustainable competitive advantages that could support long-term market leadership. The NIH recognition created a platform for continued strategic innovation and expanded market opportunities, while demonstrating that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had developed internal capabilities for sustained competitive advantage through collaborative research excellence and systematic strategic partnership development. The breakthrough moment marked the transition from proving strategic transformation potential to implementing expanded strategic initiatives that could leverage newly established competitive advantages while addressing additional market opportunities through systematic application of validated strategic methodologies and organizational capabilities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.